You're listening to Solar Insiders, a fortnightly podcast that shines the light on the world's biggest energy source. Solar Insiders is presented by Giles Parkinson, the editor of Renew Economy, and Sophie Vorath, the editor of One Step Off the Grid. And Solar Insiders is brought to you by Pylon, the essential solar design tool to grow your solar business with quick and effortless proposals that will impress your customers.
Hello and welcome to Solar Insiders. This week I speak to Allegra Spender, who is the federal member for Wentworth in New South Wales. Spender was elected as one of the climate and renewables forward Teal independents that helped to oust the coalition government in 2022. Her electorate in Sydney's eastern suburbs has more than 60% of its population housed in apartments, so she's been a fierce advocate of extending the benefits of solar, batteries and electrification to renters and apartment dwellers. In our podcast this week, we discuss the permanent energy bill relief plan Spender has put forward ahead of the May 3 election and what she would like to see added to Federal Labor's home battery rebate. We also take a look at some of the other key renewable energy and environmental reforms the crossbench is likely to push for in the event that the election results in a minority Labor government. Later in this episode, we will listen to a chat that Giles and I recorded from a little fishbowl on the exhibition floor of the Smart Energy Conference in Sydney. Nearly a whole team was at the event, which was great, and it was hosted by the Smart Energy Council and offered plenty to see and think about. So you can listen to our debrief a little bit later on. But first, let's hear from Allegra Spender. Allegra Spender, welcome to Solar Insiders.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you. A very busy time for you, so I really appreciate you setting some time aside to talk to us. Obviously, you and several other independent candidates that were dubbed the Teals, which must be your favourite, were hugely influential in last election's result. In tapping that zeitgeist that so many people are very concerned about climate change, very concerned about what we can do to help prevent dangerous climate change, and in the meantime, how that can also help address cost of living issues. So this has been a theme from independents such as yourself for quite a long time. And this time around, we're headed into a new election, obviously, and cost of living is right at the top of the agenda. And right in amongst that is the cost of energy, obviously. Now, I thought we would start by we had a lot of coverage of the major parties' policies such that they are on these things. And we've also, on Renew Economy, reported last week some of the Greens' new offerings on that. But we'd love to hear from Allegra Spender, the member for Wentworth, on your main consumer energy policy.
Yeah. Look, for me, the focus on consumer energy policy has been sort of my main focus for me throughout this term. And that is because, we have to make this transition, but we also need to keep the community on side through this transition. And, I certainly hear still people on the street saying, oh, my energy bill's gone up and that's because of all your renewable energy. Now, that's not right. But the truth is that has been prosecuted by those people, enemies, I think, of the transition out there. And so I think this is, we need to maintain the social license for this transition. And we actually need to help people when people really are struggling. But the frustration I've had with so much of what the government has put forward so far this term is it's been short-termist. So you're sort of helping people, with some money off a bill now, money off a bill, next, for the next 6 months, but it's not permanent. And that's why I've really been pushing, saying, look, how can we permanently lower energy bills and do the right thing by climate? If we can match those two things together, then, I think we genuinely have a chance to, get all sorts of people on side, including a taxi driver I had the other day who said, when we emerged, I was a politician, we were talking about, what I was, he's like, oh, well, I don't believe in climate change. And then he proceeded to tell me all about his solar array and how much difference it was making to him. I was like, well, that, for me, that's a perfect example where, for some people, it's never going to be about climate action. But if you can actually help them, when it comes to just managing their bills and giving them more certainty over their bills, it's really critical. So that's kind of the intro. Then let me get into the three pieces. The other side I've been really noticing is that with some of the things that the government has put forward this term, which I have supported, that it's always a bit sort of piecemeal with different groups met, but different groups left out. And so what we did was put forward a package that would help 800,000 homes, but different types of homes. So there's firstly for homeowners, there's a package about giving people zero interest loans up to $25,000 to spend on batteries, insulation, so thermal upgrades or appliances that would permanently lower their power bills. And that would help over 450,000 people. Then for renters, and this is probably my biggest critique of where the government's at the moment, renters are still substantially left out. But in my electorate, 40% of my community are renters. And this is really important, and that we know from all the stats, it's renters who are actually struggling the most with cost of living more broadly. So we've got a package which is specifically to give incentive to landlords to make energy upgrades and to be able to depreciate those immediately rather than over 10, 15 years, which will mean that they have much greater incentive to, when the hot water system breaks down, get a heat pump, when, to replace the stove, with an electric or induction one, those sorts of decisions, giving the landlords the right sort of nudges towards supporting their renters. And the last piece is about social housing. I had an early meeting in this term with with some of the New South Wales government, and they were talking about all the social housing they were building. And I said, "What are you doing about putting solar on?" And they're like, "Well, we just focus on the housing." It's like, well, yeah, I think that's important. Of course, we need to build the social housing, but we need to put on solar at the same time because it makes a substantial long-term difference to some of the most vulnerable people in our community. Now, the government has done it, but we're proposing, as part of my package, was to add another 70,000 homes onto that list so that more people could benefit from those changes in social housing. So it's really trying to address different parts of the community, some of whom aren't really catered for currently, and making sure that everyone's got something that can help with this transition.
Yeah, I thoroughly agree. One of the first emails I got from a reader when we wrote about Labor's battery rebate was from a renter saying, that this has nothing for me. So, yeah, I think it's really important to address that. Have you had any conversations with federal Labor about this part of your policy?
It's part of my ongoing conversation. To be honest, I mean, when I first met Chris Bowen, when I first sat down with him after the last election, I said, look, fuel efficiency standards, absolutely critical. And then sat down with him and Jenny McAllister when she was the assistant minister in this space and said, but you've got to do more on the household side, and you've got to include renters in that package. Now they've moved on the household side, both in this term and also with this battery program, which I do support. I think it is really positive. But that renters piece, I will continue to go. And I've been, trying to also talk to other MPs across the spectrum who also have a lot of renters, because we do represent a community that needs a voice. And I think part of my job is to speak up and stand up for it. So I would say it's work that is ongoing, and I'm not going to give up on it because, it's just really important. A third of this community of our country rents, and, we just need to make sure that they can benefit and, have that, they want to be part of the energy transition. And, they also want the impact on their power bills.
Absolutely. And that's the name of your policy, is the permanent energy bill relief, which I think is a really important message because, as you say, there's a lot of little offers around that will sort of make a difference, today and tomorrow and for 6 months. But things will swing right back to where they were unless we address the core problems. On renters, I think, and while they're absolutely still definitely ignored from the solar and battery side of the equation, the electrification side of the equation is really important too. We've seen more and more research out, just telling us how much of a difference it can make if households switch out their gas appliances for electric appliances. And this would go very much the same for rental properties. I know that there was not a single house I rented that had an electric stove or, didn't have gas ducted heating, gas hot water here in Victoria, in Melbourne. So, it's a real issue. That's a big part of it as well, not just the sort of battery and solar side?
Absolutely. And look, I think what we were trying to do, and I think is still really important, is recognize people's houses are different, people's homes are different. And frankly, we've got a big and quite diverse country. And so what might suit you in Darwin may not suit you in Victoria. And so, and I think that's why I focused on firstly having zero interest loans that are available on a bunch of things for households, because if you are in Darwin, it might be about, okay, insulation might be your best part. If you're in Victoria, it actually might be a heat pump. Like it might, you just have different sort of priorities. You might not be solar may not work for you, and frankly, or a battery may not be possible for you because you can't get solar for whatever reason on your property. So I think you do need to meet households where they are and recognize that we come in different shapes and sizes. We live in apartments, we live in townhouses, we live in all sorts of different places. And so there's got to be a degree of flexibility there. That is, I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I know that from the Rewiring Australia put out a report recently just talking about how important getting the finance side of it right for electrification. Goodness me, I can't get my words out. Electrification, how important that is. Because, it can be a higher upfront cost, but then the savings for the long term can be really amazing and life-changing for people. Now, back to sort of more electoral issues. You obviously it was a big sort of shift in the 2022 election that really got everyone's attention, and it was I think a really defining moment for Australia. And I guess this time around we're sort of watching to see if that's still there, if we still have that momentum, if with the voters behind climate action. And I guess my concern is that people are so worried about the cost of living that other things are kind of falling into the background. Is that your experience out there campaigning, or are people still very concerned?
Both. I mean, I think that for lots of people, cost of living is super important. But at the same time, climate is too, and they recognise these two things are linked. Certainly, raising insurance costs and things like that, people recognise that some of the biggest drivers of our increasing insurance premiums is the fact that we have all these adverse weather events, and the more extreme weather is affecting just my electorate. The other day, we got sort of walls, brick walls down at Bronte Beach, sort of knocked out by the force of the sort of storm and the waves that came up, and also down at Bondi. So I think people recognise both, and again that's why I think household electrification is so important, because it brings those two issues together, and it gives people an excuse, either whether climate's your most important issue or cost of living your most important issue. You can get behind both of those. You can get behind, whatever makes the most difference to you. So, and I think what we're also seeing, and certainly in my electorate, are more people working in the clean energy sector, people working on that transition. And I think we, can't forget that transition, both at the household level, but also at the national level, employs a lot of people. We're doing big infrastructure places work that is employing a lot of people. And again, the uncertainty from the sort of broader sort of nuclear, will we, won't we, renewables, are we going to keep on going? We're going to slow them down. That is also, that's undermining of business investment and confidence. And, why we can do things is when businesses, feel like, yes, I'm going to get a return. So I think that's another big part, that perhaps we don't talk enough about, is also that there are a bunch of people out there whose jobs are related to renewable energy and cleaner energy, as well as households who are affected by it.
Yeah. And just going back to something you said earlier, what do you say to people who say to you, oh, the shift to renewable energy has pushed prices up? Obviously, as you mentioned, there's been this very consistent messaging from the coalition for a very long time now. And obviously it does stick, if you sling enough mud. What do you say to people who say that to you?
Look, I go back, I always go back to, so look, the biggest sort of spikes, in energy costs came out of the Ukraine war, where, gas prices around the world spiked, and that had obviously a significant flow on effect, to Australia. And so, we're exposed to international prices, and that is the case. Now, it doesn't mean there isn't cost through this energy transition, but let's be honest, we know we have to transition anyway, because 90% of our coal-fired power stations are closing in the next 10 years. Anyway, so that's the other piece I continually make is, we don't have a choice of doing nothing. We have to make some investment, and it's a question of, what's the most, what is going to deliver us lowest cost for consumers, most reliable energy for businesses, and the right thing for our environment, and finding that sort of sweet spot. And it certainly isn't nuclear.
Now, casting our minds ahead, and let's just play a little game where Labor wins a minority government. And, there's a bit of influence coming from elsewhere, which could be a very healthy thing. What would be the policies that you think that the crossbench would push most strongly for, trying to sort of push Labor's hand a bit on certain things, like, for example, their sort of reluctance to set a 2035 emissions target at the moment and that kind of thing? What are some of the bigger renewables policies for Australia you think that they might come under pressure over?
Look, I think that setting the target's really critical, and then having the sector pathways to get there. I think it's fundamental. It's the architecture, from under which that we can, and really act. I think the second piece is households. There is a lot more they can do with households, renters, as we talked about, social housing, but also there are some changes that would make it easier for people to electrify, things like a one-stop shop. This is a conversation I have continually having, and I will continue to have with the Labor government, having one place that people can go and say, well, this is, I live in a four lot strata unit, or I live in 100 lot strata unit, or I live in detached home. Help me make the right decisions for my clean energy transition. So and some also state-based regulation that could make a difference there. So those are, I think, really important. I also bring in the EPBC Act because I think that's a real, when I talk to renewable energy providers, delay in building and getting approvals on big projects costs money. It makes things much harder and more expensive to build, and makes the numbers blow out. So we actually need to do the right thing by the environment and the right thing by business, and reform the EPBC Act so people can get a fast no or a good yes without all this sort of 5, 6, 7 years worth of delay, because we can't build what we need until we actually have those law reform done. So I think that piece of legislation, it's environmental, but it's critical to the clean energy transition. And we need to get that done in the first year. The government promised it for this term. It hasn't been delivered. That law reform is critical.
Yep, absolutely. It's certainly what we hear from the industry as well. I'd like to close on a slightly more personal note, because I know that you've had your own journey into electrification. So you have your own lived experience, and once again, it's not easy. I've been trying to help my brother with it, and it's even from with all of my experience, it's just not easy. So I'd love to hear a bit about how you electrified and how it worked, and sort of what some of your takeaways were.
Well, look, actually, it's interesting. The way I got into electrification and this actually the energy transition was a friend of mine was working on putting some solar panels on the ICC in the International Convention Centre in Sydney as a big project. He was trying to get up and said, would you join the board as someone with a business experience? And we really pushed that. That ended up getting, I think it was 2,500 maybe investors at a really retail level, because we wanted for people who were locked out because they're apartment dwellers or renters to be able to access renewable energy and the rebates from that. So that was my original journey. It's kind of probably why I'm in politics, is because of that, all that, that was over 10 years ago. Just doing that as a volunteer, as a voluntary board actually is what we did. And that's really got me along. then it's been, at a personal level, I was one of those people who, must have been 15 years ago or so, they said, gas is better for the environment than electric. So we put in gas heating. Then now I'm like, turned up all our gas heating. So, because things change. And so at the moment we're moving from a current place and about to move into somewhere else. So we're putting up all this, doing solar, getting gas completely out of this place, trying to make all those upgrades and also future-proof a bit. Because this technology is changing all the time. So sort of batteries and, hoping that by the time that we get there, you'll be able to charge off your car and reverse and all those things. So it's none of that stuff is straightforward. And I've certainly talked to lots of people in the community, people who are like engineers and certainly things like heat pumps, we just don't have as much of them. I don't know what it's like in Victoria, but certainly in Sydney, as much as you would think. So there's a lot of work, we need to do. And what we've been doing, is trying to get good resources out there in the community so people know what's available and have good people to talk to. Because I think, it's that lived experience is not straightforward. So that's our journey. I'd say it's a work in progress at the moment. We're trying to get this renovation on this house we're about to move into right, so that that it is really well set up.
Yeah, and that's so important because, that's what every month or every quarter, if you don't have it right, it can bring a lot of pain.
It does. Yeah.
And it's amazing how many differences can be made from such small things as making sure you've got a good, thermal envelope. And this is where your advocacy for, quality social housing is super important, because from the very get-go, we need to build these houses, for some of the most vulnerable people in our society and make them well built so that they are not so, affected by all of the weather and the bills are kept down. And it's really quite a simple concept that just needs to be implemented from the very start.
I think that's right. Yeah, it's always cheaper to do it from the start than retrofit. I think that's learning for any of those sorts of pieces. And we've got, some distance to go. I think that's really right.
Yeah, we certainly have. Well, thank you very much again for your time today, and all the best with all of your campaigning. And I'm sure we will be hearing more from you. And and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time. Take care.
That was the federal member for Wentworth, Allegra Spender. Now let's travel back in time to Thursday of last week and listen to the Renew Economy editorial dispatch from the Smart Energy Conference.
Sophie, this is a very different situation. Here we are at the Smart Energy Council Conference in Sydney. I mean, normally we're doing this remotely with cameras off, and we're in a fishbowl, I think, in the middle of the floor.
One does feel like a guppy.
Like a guppy. There seems to be a lot of people here. There's a lot of booze. There's a lot of excitement about behind the meter energy here. I mean, storage is a big thing.
It is a big thing, and it's been a big thing for a while now, but I think the expectation now is that it's going to go to the next level, and that will be helped along with a rebate if it indeed happens.
Yeah. Now, you had the fun of spending last weekend reporting and listening in on the new battery storage initiative from the federal government, and listening to a webinar with the Smart Energy Council and the Federal Energy Minister, Chris Bowen. Everyone seems to be pretty pleased with what they've been offered.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of hard work has gone into it, a lot of listening, a lot of making sure, I think, the same mistakes that have been made with state subsidies, that are sort of usually unintended. No one wants to hamstring the industry they're trying to help. But that has happened in a few cases. That valley of death between the time when you announce the rebate and when it kicks in can be a serious pain for businesses. But they've tried to do everything they can to avoid that, to listen to what would be best, what would be easiest. I think using the SRES, the existing rooftop solar scheme, is really important, because that means it's a known entity. no new paperwork. I think that's a huge thing.
Well, there are
for
probably a
business.
few little things, but anyway. But I mean, it's a progression. So yes, yeah. And it's interesting too that the government, so they're going to spend $2.3 billion, and they're going to be buying the certificates. So
Yeah.
the strategy behind that's actually quite important. Because it just means that the costs, there will be no accusation that costs are being thrust upon other consumers. And in fact, all the savings will be shared amongst everyone because there will be definite savings from having more batteries on the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. And what Chris Bowen said today was they just wanted to make extra sure there was no pressure anywhere put on electricity prices at all from this policy. It's just a good news for prices policy in that, it'll help the people who get the rebate. But as you said, push down prices across the grid.
Yeah, he was in a pretty buoyant mood today in his jeans and his red T-shirt with his cheaper solar thing and sort of throwing out there against the coalition. He had a couple of wonderful turns of phrases about their gas policy. But what's the mood? You did a bit of a walk around with some of the battery storage installers here. What's the mood?
Look, the mood is hopeful, I guess. It's going to be a huge thing, if this comes into play, presumably it'll be a huge boost to sales for a lot of people and to business. So I guess they're in a bit of a holding pattern at the moment. This big thing is being dangled.
And there's an election on, and we don't yet know the result. So
we do not. As much as we'd love to be able to call it, we cannot. Anything could happen as America will.
Because everything has happened so far in the last couple of elections. And we get a bit wary about making any sort of predictions. But I guess the tea leaves are looking slightly positive at the moment. But as you sort of say, anything can happen.
Yeah.
There's a lot of speculation about. So basically what this battery rebate will do will actually sort of reduce the price by around about a third, as I understand it. So a $15,000 battery becomes a $10,000 battery, a $5,000 battery becomes a $3,500 or something battery and things like that. It's been interesting because we've heard so much about battery cell prices coming down over the last year, about 30 or 40%, depending on who you believe. But we haven't actually seen that reduction in retail prices for batteries. So that's kind of been, I don't know why that is. Maybe but maybe there might be more competition now or something.
No, and maybe it's a scale issue too, because I guess the bigger the big project, they can cut the costs kind of across the balance of plant and all of that stuff. But these smaller batteries, maybe the cost is baked in a bit more from a while.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It
no doubt if it comes in and demand rises, then prices will start to fall.
Well, we saw that with the original ESRA scheme in solar. So then we knew that, solar prices had fallen. They're expected to fall further. You get a policy which supports more investment and more product, and then prices just fall even further. So that it could be a double benefit then.
Absolutely. And of course, if there's a rebate, it takes the pressure off the need for that to happen so quickly. Because everyone's been waiting for that to happen, and a lot of people waiting for sort of the signs from the universe that now's the time to invest. So this will be the sign, and then prices should start coming down.
Yeah. It's only the first day that we're recording this rather than the second day. But have you heard anything else that's non-battery specific?
Non-battery, no.
The Prime Minister Palau came out with an interesting.
Oh, he did.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
That was I thought, a really incredible speech. Just reminding us of the reality of climate change for some of our Pacific Island neighbours. And I like the fact that he referred to Australia as the oldest sibling, the big brother or sister, and that we have a serious role to play there. And also I love the way he described the COP, because Dutton's come out and said that they won't necessarily, they probably won't support the COP happening here, and that's
the United Nations Conference of Parties, the climate conference, which is Australia would like to hold in 2026. Well, at least one side of politics in Australia would like to hold in 2026, but
in partnership with the Pacific Island nations. So it's been a big deal, and I think it's been dismissed on the right as a waste of money and time, perhaps. But the way the president of Palau put it is that it's a huge trade show. It's the biggest green trade show, aside from things like the Olympics. It's one of the biggest ways to boost the industry and to, I think he said something like a 2-to-1 return on investment as far as, the kind of, so, aside from being a very important political and climate action move, showing our support for the Pacific Islands.
Rather than making jokes about sort of water tipping over. Yes, absolutely, yeah. And it'd be an important time for the Pacific Islands too if it does happen, because I do remember going back to the Copenhagen Climate Conference, the one that ended up in sort of a bit of a mess. And they had this massive globe in the sort of the main auditorium and had every country in the world except they didn't have the Pacific Islands. No. And so the AOSIS, which is the Association of sort of Small Island States, looked at that and just thought, well, they've already wiped us out. It's just such a shocking mess.
Yeah, that is super unfortunate.
Sometimes you expect better of Denmark, but anyway, it wasn't to be. Although I have actually heard a few whispers around the place that while Labor is very keen to host the climate conference, there are some people like Chris Bowen are very keen. There's some who are sort of a bit reticent about whether it might actually highlight the fact that we're one of the world's biggest fossil fuel exporters, and maybe that might become a focus of scrutiny. But
well, that was also mentioned in the speech. It's like, no, you're also the biggest polluter, so
clean up your act.
We're not going to sweep that under the rug either. So I think, it would have, we'd have to face a few facts, but we should be facing those facts.
Well, circling back to rooftop solar and battery storage, that's actually going to help us transition. I think Penny Sharp was also talking today about the battery storage incentive and that sort of growth in rooftop solar. And this is enabling a transition quicker than they had imagined. So it's not just about building big wind, big solar and transmission lines. It's also about what happens behind the meter in people's homes, the fact that consumers will have the power and just be major players in the grid.
That's right.
So long as we can actually sort of modify and adapt the rules that they are also rewarded for their efforts and their investments.
That would be a big piece of the puzzle. But I do like that message of putting all this amazing solar that we've installed on rooftops to work, like, really getting the most out of it, because already it's an amazing success story, but there's another level we can take it. So
there's a nice line. I've just done an interview for one of our other podcasts with the Chief Operating Officer of Essential Energy, talking about their new vehicle to grid trial and the fact that they've just sort of finalised the first technology with one of the first EVs, and he was just talking about the network, and it used to be a place where electrons went to die, but now they can actually go. Now they can actually be absorbed and used and sort of thrive and be put back into the grid for useful purposes. So I thought that was quite a nice little touch anyway. But anyway, on that, Sophie, we'll get back to our main program. And it's been great catching up in person.
It has, in the fishbowl.
In the fishbowl. I think our producers might force us to do this again, but I'm sure we're going to be very happy about that. So anyway, thanks for joining us.
That is our episode for the week. Please have a listen to the latest Energy Insiders podcast on Renew Economy and the Switched On podcast on One Step Off the Grid. And look out for our fancy new content on your favourite social media platforms. Thanks to our sponsors Pylon and to you, our listeners. And we will be back with a new episode of Solar Insiders in 2 weeks' time. Have a lovely Easter break. Bye for now.
Solar Insiders was brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for solar installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly costs and no lock-in contracts. Join Australia's top solar companies who trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals.